What is up, and welcome into the block. I've got my guys, Carl Reed, Blake Brockermeyer. I'm Colin Kennedy, and we are here ready for Big 12 Day on the block. Before we get into today's show, you at home, like, subscribe, share, continue to get us out there as we build this show up for the weeks to come in anticipation of the 2022 season. Gentlemen, the Big 12 is in headlines these days, but a lot of that's conference realignment. We still got a season to play, right? So with Big 12 Media Days coming up soon in Arlington, Texas, we are going to predict everything when it comes to the Big 12 conference. I'm excited to get into today's show, but the first topic of today's show is none other than projecting the finish of order within the Big 12 conference. Blake, you've given us your final standings in terms of projection for the 2022 season. I want to go 10 through 6 to start. So who do you have finishing towards the bottom of the Big 12 in 2022?
I've got Kansas finishing at the bottom this year. I think Lance Leipold has done an incredible job. I think with their scholarship numbers back on the rebound, they're going to make a run here shortly. They're on the right path to a great program. Again, I think, obviously beating Texas last year was a huge deal. So I have them finishing last, and then I've got Tech next. Carl, what do you think about Texas Tech?
Well, I like Tech with the energy that Coach McGuire is bringing to the program. He's a Texas guy through and through. I'm excited with the staff that he's hired, especially the offensive coordinator. They still have not decided on who the quarterback is going to be. A couple interesting guys on the roster. And so with a new coach and a new staff, I'll be interested to see what Texas Tech does, and we'll kind of have to wait and see. Blake, you got TCU number 8. What can you tell us about the TCU football program?
Yeah, I think TCU's on a different path than they've been under Gary Patterson with Sonny Dykes taking over. They're going to run more of a spread offense, kind of a run and shoot type offense. They've hired a Tulsa defensive coordinator to run their defense. They'll run more of a robber defense. They've got some nice pieces. I know Coach Dykes had told me earlier this spring how excited they were about their offensive line. Quarterback will be an issue. Will Chandler Morris take over? Not sure about that, but I think with Hodges Thomason on defense and Quentin Johnson on offense, they've got some nice pieces. So we'll see how they do, but I think they're probably a year away from really making some noise in the Big 12. I've got Iowa State up next. What do you think about them this season, Carl?
I think consistently that Iowa State is the toughest team to always gauge in the Big 12 because they don't get a lot of big-time recruits, but Matt Campbell has really sold that program on having a 5-star culture. They lost their big running back in Breece Hall, but their staff has pretty much stayed continuity. You got a great defensive coordinator in John Heacock, and who has given those RPO offenses fits with the Iowa State personnel that they have. So they don't have top-tier personnel, but Matt Campbell, who's also really been at the top of a lot of other programs' wish list for coaching, it would not be surprised if over the course of the season we see the toughness of Iowa State and the culture of his program push them up into the higher rankings of the Big 12 as we get deeper into the season.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Iowa State, and now you're going into West Virginia as your next pick.
Yeah, West Virginia will be an interesting team this year with JT Daniels taking over at quarterback. I really hope he can stay healthy this year and maximize his skill set. He's an incredible quarterback that can make every throw on the field when he's healthy. His biggest problem is just missing a lot of games over the course of his career, but they've got most of their offensive line back. They've got some nice weapons at receiver. I think offensively they have a chance to be really good. Defense, I have some issues, not some issues with, but some questions about. It'll be interesting to see how their defense is this year. They've got some good home games this year. They're always tough to beat in Morgantown, so that'll be an interesting team to watch. I think they might have some upsets alerts in West Virginia this year. I've got Oklahoma State next. I think Mike Gundy does as much with as little talent as anybody in the country. He's their leading running back and receiver from last season, but he will find someone somewhere. He's got Spencer Sanders back, which feels like his 10th season in Stillwater. And he's an experienced quarterback. That's a solid player. They're going to be solid on offense, run their outside zone scheme. They lose Jim Knowles to Ohio State defensively. They've got some monsters on their defensive line, and Colin Oliver and Tyler Lacey. So they'll miss Malcolm Rodriguez as kind of a linebacker safety hybrid guy, but I'm curious to see what their back end looks like in Stillwater this year, but they're going to be tough to beat. I've got Kansas State next. I think Chris Kleiman does an incredible job with the talent that he's got in Manhattan. I think Kansas State is a sleeper team this year with Adrian Martinez at quarterback, Deuce Vaughn. They've got Felix Azuma, who's one of the best players in the country on defense, and they've got a complete team this season. So I think Kansas State is a team to really keep an eye out this year, and they've got they've got an interesting squad back this year. So I'll be curious what that team looks like. They've got a tough schedule, so that's something to keep an eye on as well. I've got Oklahoma next. I've got Oklahoma as my third team in the Big 12. I think Oklahoma is going to be a really explosive team on offense this year. They've got Dylan Gabriel, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, throw an incredible deep ball. They're going to run RPO, tempo offense. They've got Marvin Mims, Drake Stoops back at wide receiver. Bill Beanball does a great job on the offensive line. So the real question I have is their defense. And with Brent Venables there, that they're going to figure something out, but I'm not sure. They got to stay healthy this year on their back end, especially. But I'm really excited about the future of Oklahoma because I think Brent Venables is going to be one of the best coaches in the country defensively, like he has been for the last 10 years or so.
Oklahoma right now with Venables and Oklahoma, it's a lot of excitement around the program, especially with them bringing Venables back in terms of him being a guy that was there for in the heyday. They do have some questions defensively. They added C.J. Colden, a transfer from the University of Wyoming, in the secondary, and so that'll give them some depth and another really talented guy to put back there. The key for Oklahoma, whether they can compete for another Big 12 championship, will be how fast that they can gel the players in the new coaching staff and overcoming some of the losses that they had.
Yeah, they definitely have the talent to compete for the Big 12 this year, and they're a team that could easily win it. I've got Texas next. I think Texas offensively is going to be really explosive. They've got some dynamic wide receivers on their team. Xavier Worthy is one of the best in the country. They've got Quinn Ewers at quarterback this season. Of course, Bijan Robinson, who is an all-around stud. So their big question mark on offense for them is their offensive line. How many young guys are they going to play? I think they'll probably play a lot this year. And then their defense has to get better across the board. Every level on defense has to improve. They got to do a better job of putting these guys in great positions to succeed. And I expect them to step up this year, and they'll be better than they were last year. I've got,
every year it seems like it's Texas's year. We consistently talking about Texas. Everybody down there wants them to do a great job, but to me, it's just been a long time since they were the team to beat in the Big 12. And I know they added some key recruits and they got some guys coming back, but they're just going to have to show me on the field before I can buy into Texas.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I've been cautious to pick them too high. That's why I've got Baylor as my favorite to win the Big 12. They're the champs from last season. To beat the best, you got to be the best. You got to beat the best. And I think with Blake Sharpen at quarterback this year, I think their offense is going to look a lot different. He's a huge upgrade at quarterback, in my opinion. He can throw the ball very well. I think Baylor does a great job with their outside zone run game and Jeff Grimes. And I think, they're going to be offensively really good this year. Defensively, Dave Aranda is, he's one of the best in the country. Very cerebral coach, understands defense. They've got a really good defensive line that can plug and really stuff the run. Their linebacking group, I think is a really solid unit. Their secondary, I have some concerns with just because of experience. But Dave Aranda, again, I think he's got a great opportunity to have a big year. Their schedule is brutal. I mean, they got to go on the road and play their some of the toughest games of the season on the road. So that could be a big hurdle for them. But I'll take Baylor right now until somebody else proves me different.
I think that Dave Aranda was, to me, the surprise of the offseason was that he stayed at Baylor. He has a great program. He's a defensive-minded guy, and he has Baylor playing really tough in a league that has typically been more softer with passing and spread offenses. And Dave Aranda brought a really tough-minded brand of football to Baylor. And I do think Baylor's got a really good team this year. But like you mentioned, their schedule could provide a real challenge, and they could get tripped up along the way. So I don't know if Baylor is necessarily my favorite to win the Big 12 this season.
So, Carl, I want to ask you, as you bring that up, if you're not picking Baylor to win the Big 12 and you're not necessarily buying stock in Texas either, who is your Big 12 champion in 2022?
Well, Colin, I think that this is Kansas State's year to win the Big 12. This will be their first time at the top of the league since the 2012 season. The number one reason I think it's their year is Chris Kleiman is a winner, and he's provided a great culture. Kansas State is a tough-minded, physical run team. They have about 40 to 50 variations of the power run. And so you got to be a real football guy to understand the power O offense. But you return a tailback in Deuce Vaughn, who I think can be upwards of 2,500 to potentially 3,000 all-purpose yards this season. We've talked a lot on this show about Felix Uzoma, but they also do return Khalid Duke on defense, who missed the majority of last season. I think that Kansas State right now, with Oklahoma being a little down, with Texas not arriving yet, I think that this is an opportunity for Chris Kleiman's team to really stamp their identity the same way that he stamped it up at North Dakota State. This is the year that the Kansas State Wildcats win the Big 12. And with Oklahoma and Texas leaving for the SEC, do not be surprised if Kansas State consistently becomes the major player in this conference.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what the Wildcats do, because guess who led the Big 12 in all preseason selections? It wasn't Oklahoma or Texas or Baylor or Oklahoma State. The Wildcats, with the most players named to the preseason all Big 12 media team. Going to be interesting to see what Chris Kleiman can do this upcoming season. But I want to talk about one coach who's got an exciting team to maybe one coach who's got something to prove, Carl. As we look at the Big 12 and its landscape, which coach might be on the hot seat going into 2022? Who has the most to prove at that head coaching spot?
The guy with the most to prove is West Virginia head coach Neil Brown. He came in after having a hot shot career at the Group of Five level, known as an offensive guru. He's finally got a quarterback now in JT Daniels, who he seems to believe in. Like Blake mentioned earlier in the show, they got to get better defensively. They have to be able to stop people. I'm expecting a big year out of edge rusher Linnell Carr on the West Virginia defense, but they're going to have to win some football games. Neil Brown so far has been 17-18 as the coach in West Virginia. We know this is year 4 going into year 4. We know that college football fans, towns, and administrations this time more than ever have not been quick to give guys a really long time to turn it around. So 4 years in today's business is an eternity. They need something positive to happen for Neil Brown in West Virginia this year to keep that thing going forward in the right direction.
Blake, when you look at Neil Brown at West Virginia, would you agree that he's the coach on the hot seat in 2022? Or is there maybe somebody else on your board who has something to prove?
Yeah, you look at the Big 12. I mean, he's the only candidate that makes any sense to me. I mean, there's a lot of new coaches in the Big 12. There's some coaches that have done a good job in just the first couple of years. So he's the obvious candidate to me that, and there's really, to me, not even a second candidate, because everybody else is relatively new.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of turnover when we talk about coaching in the Big 12. So in Neil Brown's defense, I think we would all agree he's probably the lone candidate. And we would assume he potentially has the opportunity to have a very good year for the Mountaineers. Now, speaking of good years, I want to talk about newcomers in the Big 12 conference, which to step in and provide a major impact for their respective teams. Blake, going to you, which freshmen should everyone be watching as we enter the 2022 season?
Well, Texas has invested in their offensive line for the first time in a while. And so I think you really have to look at their 2022 group of offensive linemen. They've got Devin Campbell, who's probably going to be a guard, and Kelvin Banks, who's probably going to be a tackle. I would expect both of those guys to be starters at some point during the season. Maybe at the beginning of the season, might be towards the end of the year, but I think before the year is out, both of those guys will be starters, and there might even be another one in there. I mean, Cole Hudson has looked good early on in the spring. He was one of the early enrollees that they had, but I think Texas is going to have a new look offensive line. They might have some growing pains, but I think those are two guys to really keep an eye out, because that's what's going to limit their offense, if anything, this year is their offensive line.
Keep an eye out for Neto Umeozulu too. I got to watch him at Allen High, and he is a freak of nature. If those offensive linemen at Texas can put it together, one of the best offensive line classes we've seen in the past couple of cycles could help out the Longhorns a lot as they try to reestablish themselves in the Big 12 Conference. Going from top freshmen to top players overall, Carl, when we look at the Big 12, who are your top three potential Heisman Trophy contenders within the Big 12 Conference?
Well, I'm going to start off with the guy that I think is the best player on the best team in the league, and that's Deuce Vaughn. I think that in order for Kansas State to win the Big 12, Deuce Vaughn is going to have to stay healthy and have a Heisman type of campaign. I think that, like I said earlier, he potentially can get up to 3,000 yards all purpose. I think that he's special. He can do a lot of things, running the ball between the tackles. He can catch the ball. I think that Deuce Vaughn is right at the top and is a candidate to end up in New York. I think I look at next Coach Dylan Gay for the Oklahoma Sooners. I think he's going to do that while Oklahoma works. Going to need Levy and Gabriel to carry the team a little bit and put up big points. And so he's going to have an opportunity to throw for a lot of yards, a lot of touchdown passes, especially as Oklahoma works to continue to build their defense and get their defense up to par. The last guy I'm going to go with is wide receiver from Texas, Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy had a breakout campaign. He was just under 1,000 yards at around 980. When you think about Quinn Ewers and the impact that he can have, if the young offensive line like that Blake just talked about can protect Quinn Ewers, then Xavier Worthy is going to be a huge beneficiary, and he's going to put up big-time yards and stats in Steve Sarkisian's offense.
Interesting to see what this trio will do in 2022. But Blake, going to you now, we're talking about Heisman Trophy contenders potentially within the Big 12, but when we talk about the NFL draft prospects within this conference, I could also make the argument that these two that you've highlighted could potentially be in that Heisman Trophy race as well.
Well, I don't know how Carl forgot about Bijan Robinson, but Bijan Robinson's got as good a chance as anybody to win the Heisman this year. He's the best pro prospect in the Big 12, in my opinion. The running backs are not a valuable commodity in the NFL draft, but Bijan Robinson has a chance to put, I think, easily over 2,000 total yards this year, rushing and receiving. He's an incredible playmaker. If he can lead Texas to the Big 12 championship this season and even expand on what he did last year, I think he can end up being one of the all-time great running backs at Texas, despite really only playing 2.5 years. He's got to stay healthy, and this will be his last year at Texas, so he's not going to be able to break, any kind of records like some of the great Ricky Williams and Earl Campbell and Cedric Benson's have over the years. But Bijan's an electric player and can go down as one of the all-time greats if he can put it all together this year. And then I think Kansas State's Felix Uzoma is a great prospect as a NFL defensive edge player. I mean, he had 11 sacks last year, got robbed of a couple of them in one of the games, but I think he will break their single season sack record this year. He's long, athletic, twitchy guy off the edge. He'll be in the conversation as a high NFL draft pick if he can, produce like he did last year. So those two guys to me are the best two guys in the Big 12 as far as NFL prospects.
Blake, did you say, now Bijan Robinson's a great player. I'm not going to argue with you there. But did you say Earl Campbell, Ricky Williams, and Cedric Benson?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
he's in that category.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is. I mean, his freshman year, he didn't play a whole lot. He did pretty well against some of the worst teams in the Big 12. But last year, I mean, Bijan, you saw what he could do. He's an electric player that can catch the ball, run the ball, make big plays, got the speed to take it to the house, and he's got incredible vision, instinct. So I think if he can put it all together this year, Texas' offense is going to be really good. They're going to be able to really open things up with him through their passing game. So I think if he can put it all together, he's going to be considered one of the all-time greats at Texas. I mean, he's got to produce this season, and he's got to stay healthy. He got nicked up a little bit last year at the end of the season, but he's one of the all-time talented running backs that's ever come through Texas. Now, can he put it all together on the field after millions of dollars and NIL deals and Lamborghinis and all that stuff? We'll see where his head is, but my guess is he's going to have a great year.
I think people forget when we talk about Bijan Robinson, a lot of people complained he may have been underutilized when Tom Herman came to town, and then Steve Sarkisian was working him in and getting him a lot of production, but then, of course, the injury hit. This is a massive year for Bijan Robinson. We've seen him towards the top of NFL draft boards as a potential #1 overall pick type in the first round. He's not going to be potentially one of those dudes you circle as one of these secure first-round picks, but he could easily climb into the top 32 when all is said and done. But, Carl, I want to close with the other guy we mentioned, Felix Uzoma at Kansas State. This is a guy you love to watch. And why is that as we get ready for him to potentially be a first-round NFL draft pick?
Well, he's going to potentially be the first edge rusher drafted. He's explosive off the edge. He plays with great hand movement. He has great lateral movement. He's equally as good in the run as he is in the passing game. He has a great frame. He's very, very active. He has a high motor. He's just a special football player to watch. He's a guy that loves to play the game. You can tell with the enthusiasm that he plays with, and not a lot of young guys play hard anymore. He's a throwback that plays very, very hard, and I think that he's going to also have a long, successful career in the NFL. He's going to get picked up very early in the draft next year.
Carl, did you forget about a guy in Alabama named Will Anderson that plays on the edge? He might be the first pick in the draft.
I forgot about Will Anderson. But we're talking about the Big 12 today. We're not talking about the SEC today. But
you said first player drafted.
You're right. Will Anderson will be the first edge rusher drafted. Felix should be going shortly after that.
Well, hey, that's what the Big 12 fans like to hear. No SEC when we're talking about the Big 12 at all. But, I mean, if you're Oklahoma and Texas, maybe there's a counter argument there. But, gentlemen, I'm very excited for Big 12 Media Days coming up tomorrow in Arlington. Be on site with our own Chris Hummer at 24/7 Sports. Keep up with coverage at 247sports.com. And, of course, you can check out the array of team sites within the Big 12 Conference we have at 24/7 Sports as well. Check out these two on Twitter, and then we will see you same time, same place tomorrow. Gentlemen, it is always fun.